There are two dilemmas that rattle the human skull. How do you hold on to someone who won't stay? And how do you get rid of someone who won't go?
From Pod 617 Productions, it's Schein On, a presentation of Berkman, Bottger, Newman, and Schein. Now here's your host, attorney Evan Schein.
Episode 28 of the Schein On podcast. I'm Evan Schein. Happy holidays, everyone. This is the last episode of 2021 and the final episode of the very first season of the Schein On podcast. And what a year it's been. What a ride, what a journey, what an absolutely incredible first season this has been with each and every one of you. All the listeners, thank you. To each and every Schein On podcast guest for bringing their A game and sharing their stories, their wisdom, and their expertise with all of us. Thank you. We have some big things in store for season 2 of the Schein On podcast, which debuts on January 4th. New featured segments, more incredible guests, and an even deeper look into the world of divorce from me, a New York City divorce attorney who lives it and breathes it from inside a courtroom and at the negotiation table, alongside my clients and a team of incredible professionals and experts. We kick off the finale of the Schein On podcast with a special Divorce Docket Year in Review, Schein's Top 10 Divorce Stories of 2021. That's right, the absolute best podcast producer in the business. Producer Dave has been hard at work day in, day out. This guy hasn't slept in weeks putting together an absolutely special and incredible docket year-end review.
I'll sleep when I die, Evan. I'm just your dutiful stagehand in the grand show that is the Schein On podcast.
And Dave, it's an absolutely incredible docket. And then after the 2021 year in review, I am joined by Dr. Katharine Esty, a psychotherapist and the best-selling author of 80-something, a practical guide to letting go, aging well, and finding unexpected happiness. Katharine is the author of the recent guest essay in the New York Times, I'm 87, I'm triple vaxxed, and I'm living my life again. This absolutely brilliant essay will inspire you, motivate you, and change the way you think about life, aging, relationships, and happiness. She's the absolute perfect guest to take us into the new year, 2022, and a year, fingers crossed, will be a great one. My interview with Schein On podcast featured guest, Dr. Katharine Esty, is coming up on the other side of the Schein On podcast special edition 2021 Top 10 Divorce Docket Year in Review.
All right, Evan, time for the last docket of the year, and it's a special one. Are you ready, sir?
Dave, let's do it.
All right. And now, let's see what's on the docket. All right, Evan. With 2021 coming to a close, mercifully, some would say, we look back, the year in review, and you, my friend, I am delighted to report to our listeners, have assembled a list for the year in review, the top 10 divorce stories of the year. So let's go right into it.
The year in review 2021.
Number 10.
Number 10, 2021, the year of the big name celebrity divorce. Bezos, Gates, Dr. Dre, Clarkson, Pitt, Jolie, De Niro. Just a few. And look, they each teach us something. Let's touch on a few big name divorces that absolutely rocked the divorce world in 2021. For Bezos and Gates, look, divorce affects us all. The money, the property, the assets. It doesn't shield and insulate you from divorce. These two divorces in particular highlight, as so many high-profile divorces do, the way in which these ultra high net worth cases often get resolved at the negotiating table, often years and months in the making before the public ever catches wind of the divorce or before that joint statement is issued. Pitt, Jolie, the divorce saga that for years seemed unresolvable. This divorce takeaway for me is the use of a private judge and how there can be other ways to resolve a litigation, really a high-profile litigation that protects the confidentiality and private details of the celebrities' lives, the lives of athletes, entertainers. Talk about confidentiality. How about Robert De Niro's divorce, which was the complete opposite of confidentiality, seemingly make it into the tabloids and page 6 of the New York Post every single time there was a court appearance. And look, Dre and his wife, Nicole, what a nasty divorce this was. They are officially divorced according to recent reports this month. How about Dr. Dre celebrating his divorce with balloons that he took to social media? And this divorce saw it all. The conflict, the allegations, the attorneys being disqualified, huge legal fee and support awards, you name it, this divorce had it. Kelly Clarkson, look, she's the perfect example and really a great inspiration to so many people out there that divorce is hard. And Kelly Clarkson has been open and candid about her divorce and how it's affected her and the struggles that she's had. And this, to me, highlights the team of support that we've talked about on so many episodes of the Schein podcast. And divorce is a true team sport. Rewind to two of my favorite episodes, episode 5 and episode 10, featuring the divorce doctor, Elizabeth Cohen.
Number 9.
The sale of one pretty damn impressive art collection as part of a divorce. The collection of the Mackalos, who went through a knockdown, drag-out, bitter divorce, one that was incredibly nasty, filled with allegations. This divorce filled the pages of New York newspapers for years. Look, art's an asset. It's often the largest asset for people with incredible wealth. And in the case of the Mackalos, they had an absolutely historic art collection that was part of the divorce. And it was subject to valuations and appraisals. And producer Dave, are you ready? Are you sitting down? Do you want to know what the Mackalo's art collection sold for? Drum roll, please. A whopping and record-breaking $676 million sale at Sotheby's officially 3 years after Judge Laura Drager ordered Harry Mackalo and Linda Mackalo to sell their art collection. The sale is final, $676 million later.
Number 8.
The year of the pet. In 2021, the New York State governor passed a law that will allow judges to consider the best interest of the pet during a family law and divorce matter. I've mentioned it on episode number 27. During the docket, the great New York County Judge Matthew Cooper, who was instrumental in the passage of this law, as he decided a famous case in 2013 where he listened to testimony on the best interest of the party's dog.
Number 7.
The NCAA takes a hard hit. 2021 was the year that college athletes now have the ability to earn money from their name, image, and likeness. And if you're wondering, how does this topic end up in the top 10 2021 divorce year in review? First, as all my listeners know, I'm a huge sports fan. I also lead my firm's family law sports division. We have had guests such as former football player Wally Gunlier, who now leads the UBS Sports and Entertainment segment, and attorney Darren Heitner on the show. I will tell you, this monumental change in how college athletes can get paid will impact athletes and their spouses in divorce when it comes to assets, income streams, and future earnings. But it also highlights the need for why athletes must consider having a prenuptial agreement in place, as their earnings can be substantial while they're still in college and without having to first sign that professional contract.
Number 6.
The real estate boom. There was a huge boom in the real estate market in 2020, and that continued into 2021. And we saw this play out in divorce negotiations all over the country. The opportunity to profit from the sale of the marital home may never be as good as it was in 2021. This played a role in the divorce negotiations all around the country. Who keeps the house? Should we sell the house? Those were the questions that I heard all year in 2021. As we head into 2022, all of us are watching the real estate market.
Number 5.
Relocation. 2021 was the year that, due to COVID and the pandemic, saw people and families pick up and leave their cities for suburban life or life in a different state altogether. I had clients leave New York to stay in their vacation home in Cape Cod, Connecticut, or leave New York for the warmer weather in Arizona or Florida. They left as one big happy family, and they could do that. People were working virtually. A temporary move then became a bit longer. Life was good out of the city in the warmer weather with the ocean breeze and a bigger space. And then what happened? One person wanted to come back to the city. They left. One person had to go back to the office. The other person wanted to stay. Then the fallout, battles over who had jurisdiction, couples breaking up. One person was in New York. The other person was in Florida. I have had at least 5 cases in 2021, battles and arguments over which state has jurisdiction, where's the divorce going to take place. We see that in Relocation in 2021. It's going to be an interesting story to follow in 2022.
Number 4.
There's a new law in New York in 2021 that bolsters privacy for domestic violence victims. I cannot underscore the importance of this law and protecting victims of domestic violence. We have seen domestic violence cases rise and skyrocket during the pandemic as more people were forced inside into quarantine. We had leading expert Dr. Cheetwa Raghavan on episode number 7 to talk about the non-physical forms of domestic violence, coercive control, and psychological manipulation. Kudos to everyone in New York State who was instrumental in passing this incredibly important law.
Number 3.
Technology. If you don't know what Zoom is, or Skype, or Microsoft Teams, crawl out of the rock that you're living under, because it's about to be 2022. Technology has changed the way we live. It's changed the way we work. It's changed the way we interact in all of our relationships. And if you still haven't embraced it, you have about a week until January 1st, 2022. Get on board, because breaking news, technology is here to stay. The inside of a courtroom has been replaced, at least for now, until the courts are fully open, with the waiting lobby on Microsoft Teams. And sure, I miss litigating in person, the rush, the energy, the adrenaline, cross-examining a witness in a courtroom, or delivering an opening statement. No Microsoft Teams will ever be able to replace that. And yes, we will be back in a courtroom in person. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, I can't wait for that to happen. The ability to settle cases in the hallway, outside the courtroom, the judge's opinions and thoughts carrying so much more weight when delivered to the clients in person. Sure, we'll get back to that place. But for now, we're litigating in a virtual world, and it has gotten to the court system and people through the pandemic while still managing to move cases forward in an efficient way. For quick conferences or status updates going forward, I do expect those to continue in some way, even when we're back in person. I expect those to continue virtually as well. Technology has changed mediation and the way sessions are conducted. I'm not sure they will ever go back in person. Technology, everybody, it's a thing of the present and the future.
Number 2.
The mediation boom. Thanks to the court system shut down early in the pandemic, the rise of alternative dispute options has skyrocketed. Schein on podcast guest and expert mediator Susan Guthrie has shared incredible insight on episode 15 about the future of mediation and why mediation has become the go-to process choice for so many people.
The Year in Review 2021.
Number 1.
The number 1 on the Schein on podcast Year in Review 2021 is COVID and custody determinations. Recently, Monroe County Supreme Court Judge Richard Dollinger ruled that a mother can have her 11-year-old daughter vaccinated over the objection of the father. This case made headlines, and rightfully so. I have seen so many clients have COVID-related questions, concerns about schedules, travel, pickup and drop-off exchanges, and none more than in recent months. But my number 1 on the Schein on podcast docket is the case of CB versus DB, a case that I was involved in as the attorney for the mother, which was decided by the great New York County Judge Matthew Cooper on October 7th, 2021. This case has been talked about, written about, and cited by so many people since it was decided. Judge Cooper determined in a published decision that the father's in-person parenting time with the party's young child would be suspended until the father was vaccinated or submitted to regular rapid and PCR tests prior to any in-person visit taking place. Apparently, this was the first published decision in the country on this exact issue. And as an attorney, this is what you live for. These moments, these cases, the difference that you can make. And look, we're living in extraordinary times. This decision highlights the times we're living in, the state of the world, and also the importance of doing everything and anything available to protect the health, the safety, and well-being of children during this time. This was the first ever Schein on podcast, top 10 divorce stories of the year. Producer Dave, let me ask you, was there one or more than one that stood out for you, whether it's my list or a divorce story out there that we've talked about in 21 that really, hit home and registered for you?
Well, first of all, I just want to celebrate the fact that number one was the one I was waiting for, listening down the whole list, and I was on the edge of my seat, hoping that you didn't forget the very case that you prevailed in, which was such a major case and in the appropriate spot on the list, because not only does that case represent a significant legal twist that eventually, I suppose, could be considered precedent. If nothing else, it's trend-setting for a judge to do that. But talk about topical. I mean, it involves COVID. It involves one part, the anti-vax crew. And I know you've probably dealt with this before, but it's an interesting moment in time because the vaccination debate has sadly become politicized. And I know that typically in a divorce, custody hearing, it's not as if you could argue, well, I don't want my child living in the home of a Republican. I think a judge would dismiss that out of hand. However, when it's tied up, and I don't even know about whether there was any political element to this or not, but this just shows you that when it comes to safety, when it comes to public safety, we've been talking about all year, that the interests of the best child are what they are. Get the shot. So it was the correct decision. I'm glad you put it there. But my reaction, and I'll stop blathering on in a moment, Evan, but my reaction is it's a tremendous list, and it goes to show you how 2021, sadly, continued a trend started in 2020, which is our lives are never going to be the same thanks to this pandemic. So many of the items on your list have to do with it. The Zoom hearings, technology, mediation maybe is even tied up in that a little bit, but there are rays of hope, like the thing I just mentioned. Sometimes the Zoom hearings are better, and we've discovered that they're more efficient. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's case specific, but
Right.
I think, look, the point is technology's here. It has impacted our lives in so many ways, in some really phenomenal ways. And we've talked about before with different guests about that silver lining. And I think when we look back at the pandemic, in terms of the court system and what's developed, we're going to look back and talk about technology in 2020, 2021, and beyond. As this time period in the court system history, technology is really going to have such an important influence and impact as we go forward in years to come. When we think about aging, we tend to think about ways we can prevent the inevitable rather than embrace it. Our featured guest today on the Schein on podcast, Dr. Katharine Esty, is a social psychologist, psychotherapist, and best-selling author. Dr. Esty's latest book, 80-Somethings, A Practical Guide to Letting Go, Aging Well, and Finding Unexpected Happiness, and her recent guest essay, I'm 87, Triple Vaxxed, and Living My Life Again, published in the New York Times, provides a framework for those transitioning to this stage of their lives and how they can continue on their life journey with a sense of optimism and hope for the future. Katharine, thank you for joining us on the podcast. I appreciate it. How are you?
Well, I'm fine, and thank you for having me here. I'm really glad to be here and excited about our conversation.
Fantastic, Katharine. We're excited to have you. You have had one absolutely remarkable career, decades and decades of experience in the psychotherapy field. You're a best-selling author of multiple books, and most recently, you penned a New York Times guest essay. Before we dive into your career, I would love to hear a little bit more about your background. What made you interested in the field of psychotherapy?
Okay, well, I was born in New York, but was always after that in small towns and wasn't particularly interested in college. I didn't major in psychology. I majored in history. So it wasn't until I was about to be 30 that I became interested. And it was really through, I think, some of the group movements of the time. And I had some experiences that I was teaching, and I got more interested in what was happening among the students than actually the subject matter. So I thought, I need to go to school. So I went to social work school and became a clinical psychologist and a therapist, and have been practicing off and on for 50 years. But then I went back to school and became a social psychologist, which is really looking at organizations and groups and how they function. So by the time I'd finished all my schooling, my 2 advanced degrees, I covered individuals and kind of inner problems. And I then was also doing kind of what makes organizations and society work better. So I cover both fronts.
Katharine, I love hearing about your background. We're going to touch on your different experiences and your truly incredible career. I want to talk about happiness, and happiness specifically as we get older in life. Is that true that we get happier with age?
It is. It's one of the gifts of aging that people absolutely don't know about. If you ask the person next to you whether we're happier as old people, they would say definitely not. But the fact is, the new science has shown that we have sort of a U shape, and people are happy very young, and then when they're in their 30s and 40s and 50s, the happiness factor goes way down. And then as you go aging, the 70s are happier than the 60s. And I found and the scientists have found too, that the 80s are happier in general than the 70s, and the 70s than the 60s. So it's very counterintuitive. And in my book, I interviewed many, many people in their 80s, and I found the same thing, that most of the people were what I call unexpectedly happy, because nobody had looked forward to growing older, or that nobody expected that they'd be having any fun when they were 80. But the older people are not. Old age is not like what it was for our grandparents, and even your grandparents.
And Katharine, tell us about that, because you have clearly found a way to strive towards happiness and to find happiness at an age in your 80s when many people are stuck. And so what would you recommend to people who are experiencing patterns of redundancy and are really finding it difficult to find that level of happiness that you talk about in your book, in your 80s?
Well, I think part of it is expectations, that people have been brought up to dread old age. And as kids, we dread old age, and we've all been fed what I would call mistaken stereotypes. I mean, we've been told you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and we say, I can't do this new technology. People sort of give up. But the real science is not only are old people happier, that old people, the mental health of elder people is also better than younger. I mean, and that is so not known by people. Actually, people when they're older are less anxious, less angry, less depressed. So if people are depressed, I mean, and there are plenty of people that are, most of them say, well, of course I'm depressed, I'm old. And that is just the wrong conclusion. The conclusion is you need to do something about your depression. You may need some medication. You may need to change the way you're living. You may be, like many of us were isolated during the pandemic, and you were having a miserable life because you couldn't go out of your home, and you were lonely, and but that's depression. That isn't the way, that's not the state of being older. And I think once some of the real science gets out. I mean, my sense is, of course, I think people sometimes don't look forward to growing old because there is death at the very end, and few people look forward to dying. But the years when people are feeling active and healthy, where they're feeling mentally sharp and feeling really capable, are expanding. Every year, more people are able to be in all those categories. And so there's a lot to look forward to that people haven't known about before.
It's absolutely brilliant. And you mentioned technology. Has technology been something that people in their 80s, especially during the pandemic, whether it's FaceTiming or connecting over Zoom like we're doing right now, has technology helped people in their 80s to feel even more connected in relationships with their children, their grandchildren, because of the way we can virtually connect right now?
I think so. I think it's changed forever, the way families connect. I mean, there's so many families now that they can actually get together in real life that have maybe a meeting every week, a meeting every 2 weeks. Sometimes they're having bigger family reunions for the Thanksgiving and the holidays. And the idea that you have, of course, in America, we live all over both coasts and everywhere in between. But now, with this new technology of Zoom, I think it's Zoom that most people use. People have the meetings and they do get together. But I do think there's still, and I feel this very strongly as a psychologist, it's not quite the same as the real meetings. I know when I got together after the pandemic with one of my women's groups, and we were outside and it was a beautiful day, and we hadn't seen each other for like 18 months, except on the screen. So to be there and to be really touching, and we were giddy like high school kids, and we were laughing, and it was like a really overpoweringly wonderful experience. And I think there's something about being really in touch that we as human beings need. We are social animals, and we do need to be together. And I don't think the screen will ever quite do it. It's a wonderful thing, and it's great that so many older people have learned how to manage Zoom. But the real in-person, in touch, touching each other is just so much better for our health. I think we all suffered during that pandemic and when we were so lonely, but I think it's great that things are opening up.
Absolutely, and especially with the holidays right around the corner, being able to connect with friends and family. And you're right, Katharine, to have that in-person connection, to sit down at the dinner table, to talk to your child, grandson, granddaughter in person, that's the feeling. And look, Zoom technology, it's amazing. It's incredible. You talk about the benefits. You see it. I see it. So many people all over the world see it. But you're right, that in-person connection is something truly special. Katharine, you wrote this terrific guest essay recently published in the New York Times on aging and living life in your 80s. How did you get interested in the topic of aging?
Well, as I said, I came late to psychology, and I came even later to aging. It was when I was 80 myself, and I actually had an aha moment. I was in the Adirondacks at my summer home, and with a bunch of my kids and grandkids, and we were out for our usual hike. It's just a small mountain that usually takes about an hour and a half to climb, and then it's an hour to come home. It's got a little steep thing, but I had done it probably at least 60 times in my life. I'd done it in recent years. But this year I started out, there were maybe 10 or 12 of us that were going up the mountain. And it had rained the day before, and so about just a little ways in, I slipped and fell down and cut my knee, and then I fell again, and I was so shook by that when I was feeling tired, and when I got to the place where you suddenly have to really go uphill, it's a scramble. I just said, I can't do this, and I was the grand that could I kind of thought of myself as a super grand because I could keep up, I could do all this. Suddenly I couldn't. So I sat down on a stump, and I kind of had to face the whole shebang of aging. I kind of said to myself, well, I am getting old. There are going to be things I can't do. I can't get up this mountain. One of my sons stayed behind with me, and I kind of cried a little bit, and the grandkids scampered up the hill, up the mountain. And I sat there, and while they all had lunch, and during that hour, I sort of came to understanding that, of course, nobody gets through life. We all age. We all have things we finally can't do, and that it was a fact. But then at that point, I said, well, I was unhappy about it. And then as a few weeks went by, I thought, well, there must be people that know how to manage these years and must be flourishing. And I'm going to find out what the secrets of aging well are. So I started interviewing people in my own retirement community. And then I started getting other people. I went to other places in my local area. And then I was calling and visiting. And I went to California and Ohio over that next year. And then I went to New Orleans. And I started interviewing people that in their 80s, long interviews. And what I found, and I did get the answers, and I did also find out that I was interested in aging. It changed me. Doing those calls and having this project that I had a purpose suddenly that was beyond anything I'd ever had. And I had this new interest and something that it became a passion and when I found out about how old age and aging has changed, I wanted to get the word out. So that's where I am now. I sort of see myself having this mission to get what the science tells us, what I've found from interviewing real people. And so that's in my book. And I thought about, there's so much that's really upbeat about that can happen from 65 until 100 that people need to know. So that's what I'm doing now. And that's how I got interested, really, from that time I sat on that stump.
And Kathy, that's such a powerful story and really incredible moment, because you had that moment that you referenced, sitting on the stump. You're incredibly active, and you had that moment where life could have gone in a few different directions. And this was in many ways the spark plug for you to become interested in this particular topic, to really be a resource and set out on the journey of speaking to people, learning about the topic, encouraging people to perhaps think about aging in a different way. And so what are a few facts that the listeners and everyone out there should know about aging and the older population?
Yeah, well, first they should know that longevity is, we all are expected to live to be 78, but that's really low because it used to be 79 just a year ago before the pandemic. And for women, it's higher than that. And in other countries, I think when we get our healthcare system set up a little better, for instance, in Japan, the life expectancy is 84. And many people think that of the 5-year-olds alive today, perhaps the majority of them may live to 100. That has been tossed out as a real possibility. So we're looking at, for everybody that's younger, even us that are older, many, many years here. And the question is, what is the purpose of these years? How do we enjoy these years? And I, for instance, said, I'm 87 right now. I have 6 years of life expectancy. On average, people that get to 87 will live 6 more years. But people don't feel it that way. They feel, in my interviews, I found that people that were 80, for instance, were very reluctant to plan anything more than 18 months because they get kind of feeling that there's a shorter horizon. But I think as we get used to the idea that we may have many, many years and we should plan for them, things will change.
Katharine, what is something that the younger generations today should know about people in their 80s and really about aging?
Well, one of the funny things that I discovered, it was kind of non-intuitive, was that I think the people in their 70s and 80s were, some of them, less anxious during this pandemic. And I said I think it's because we are closer to death. We're not so frightened by it, and I wasn't sure anyway that I somehow wasn't as afraid of COVID. There are many other ways I might go. So I think they've got to see that we are different from they are. But the things that they don't usually understand, often I think our adult children, the people that are in there. My children are in their 60s and 50s. Some people have children in their 40s, that they sometimes don't realize what our needs are. And I think our needs are to have control, to not be, sometimes adult children, not all, but a few of them get very bossy and sort of telling their parents, you got to do this, you can't do that, you got to get. I had one of my sons was saying, you can't drive down to Thanksgiving, and I actually gave in on that one and got a way to get down there, got someone else to drive me. But so I think they need to know that they need that. Well, we have to be in negotiations together. Nobody can, and sometimes older people can get irrational. And there is a time when you have to say, "Mom, I don't think you should drive anymore," or "I don't think it makes sense to do this or that." But I think there is also the sense that there is so much to look forward to, and that so many of these stereotypes aren't true. I mean, a lot of people think that people aren't interested in sex after they're 60 or something. And I think don't realize that people can be sexual and their whole life and affectionate and have relationships, that people don't realize that there's a lot of freedom that comes when you're not working so hard. I mean, I think people in there the children of people in their 70s and 80s are so busy bringing up their own kids and with their jobs, they don't know that we 80-somethings are having so much fun, and then we can wake up and say, well, now what would I really like to do today? There's a freedom, and there's a freedom when you don't care so much what people think about you. There's a freedom to dance in a certain saying, and it's sort of a metaphor, but it's real. I'm just started a dance class, and this teacher, she's a ballet teacher, but here we have all these old people in the class, and she creates a mood where we all see ourselves somehow like we're doing ballet. We don't feel awkward, and that I'm moving and having this absolute lovely experience. And I think that I just never expected I would have so much fun.
Katharine, you mentioned so many wonderful things, and one of the words, the F word, freedom, absolutely brilliant. And I love hearing that. And I would imagine that's something that whether it's your children or even a younger generation would find to be so hard to comprehend, that you're in your 80s. You mentioned ballet and a dance class and having the freedom to choose and to get up in the morning. And in the New York Times article, you describe yourself as a risk taker and an optimist. So I have to ask you, what is it that keeps you feeling young, feeling motivated to wake up in the morning, to have that freedom, to have that control, and whether it's dance class or to be in a relationship? And I know you mentioned in the article that early in the pandemic, you moved in with your significant other at that time. What is it that gets you up in the morning with that feeling of excitement that this is going to be an absolutely great day?
Well, I think I do have to say I have been incredibly lucky. I mean, I have had some bouts. I did end up in the hospital and I was recently in the hospital a second time. So I have had my share, but I think I've had essentially very amazingly good health for my age. And I live in a place that there's a lot of people. So when bad things happen to people here, there's a circle of people around them. And it's a social place. It's a community. And I'm part of a community of friends. And I have a boyfriend, a live-in boyfriend. And so that is a great way to live, I think. I had a very happy marriage, but my husband died 6 years ago. And my boyfriend is wonderful too. And so I think it's luck. And I think it was interesting from that article. Some people kept saying, well, she doesn't realize how privileged she was. Well, I do realize how privileged I have been. And I do realize, and I think more and more I'm realizing that I'm talking, and even most of the people I interviewed in the book, I did interview a lot of people that were in the lower economic end of the scale that were also flourishing, but it's much, much harder. And I think what I've learned that isn't good news is that there's a tremendous inequality in our country, and that the top half of the economic ladder are doing well, but I think it's much, much harder. And if you and people that the sort of bluntly, people that are poorer die sooner, so they don't get these extra years. And there's a huge discrepancy in the number of the life expectancy of people according to their zip code.
Oh, it's really interesting. Katharine, I want to go back to something you mentioned, that you have children who are in their 50s. What advice would you give, or have you given to your children who have watched you get older? You're in your 80s. Obviously, for adult children, seeing their parents get older can be a very hard thing to process. Is there advice that you would give to adult children about the way to process their parents aging?
Well, I think one thing, I think it's great if children have each other. I noticed that when there are a lot of people that are 80 have families of 4 and 5 and even 6. And I think that's people are having family meetings now. So I think that's a really great way because there eventually are going to be crises that happen no matter how healthy and how good you are. And I always I had one person that I interviewed, and they seemed to have worked it out so well. There were 3 kids, and they had a mother who was like in her 90s, but they had a family. The kids met on a phone call every Thursday for like half an hour just to check in. They kind of divided up the looking, and this is more for when you get to the later stages of aging. But they had one that was helping with the finances, one was helping with the emotional connection, and one was doing the healthcare stuff with the doctors and so on. And then they also had a meeting with their mother every Thursday after they'd had that initial call, just to see how she's doing, check in. And that seemed, especially if you don't live nearby, it was a really good system. So I think it's communicating. That's what I'm saying. That was one way one family did it, but it's keeping the communication open and keeping so that people know. I think a lot of time when people are actually sicker and they don't know because they aren't really seeing what's happened. So I think it's being in touch and staying. But I think, on the other hand, it's to realize that if they are doing well, that the possibilities are endless, and I think most kids really are pleased to bring the older generation in and realize it's the multi-generational family is a special deal, a special treat. But I have more what I would call guidelines for older people to age well. I think I've got some for my audience in my book and in my blogs is both these adult children who are in these multi-generational families and dealing with their parents who are both in all stages of aging. And I guess the other thing I tell young people, like 50s, that everybody ages differently. And so some people always say to me, well, you don't seem 87. Well, this is 87, but there's all other kinds of 87. And you have to you can't generalize about too much about you specifically, because people are very unique in the way they age. And so that's really important to remember.
That's a great point. And you mentioned the blogs and the resources in your book. You have so many wonderful resources out there for people in their 80s to really learn about aging well and finding happiness and the secrets and your own life experiences. I mean, they really come through. Why is it that there appears to be, or you saw in your research and studies, that there was a lack of resources and information out there for people in their 80s, as opposed to the content for baby boomers or even younger generations? What was missing that you saw the need to create these wonderful resources?
Well, I think the first thing I found out because since I was 80 and I began then, with that there was nothing that people wrote about old age from the like 65 to 100, and most of it was very prescriptive, saying do this, do that, and there were no books on it being in your 80 that were, looking at what it was actually like to be today, to be 80. So I did see a hole, and there's still a lack of a differentiation. I mean, there's a lot of transitions that happen somewhere along this long path, but you can't just generalize. And I was shocked that some of the people were like 50 were writing about what old age is like. And it just...
Katharine, what did you learn from writing your book, conducting so many interviews, speaking to so many people, connecting with all the people that you spoke to? What did you learn about writing the book that you didn't know before?
Well, I think I didn't know how deep and profound the kind of experience of aging that you want everybody needs to cope with, and that most people didn't, and I didn't understand what really happens as you age, and you have to come to grips with losing things, and yet maintaining your ability to relate to people and make connections and make new friends. And so that there was an art and some logic and some ways to go that people weren't well known. And I think lots of people did discover, even in the pandemic, how important relationships were, and that there's nothing more important than relationships. But there's also, I think, a total lack of understanding in our society of how to grieve, and older people have to grieve. When I came out of the hospital this summer and I had to go on a walker, I just couldn't believe it. I was upset, angry. I didn't want to be that one of those people on a walker, and it took me a while to accept it. And finally, I was okay, and then finally I got rid of it. So I'm now totally independent. But
oh, good. That's great to hear. And you mentioned the pandemic and relationships. And Katharine, in your essay, in the New York Times essay, you talk about the fear of not living life to its fullest over the years ahead outweigh the fear of the pandemic and COVID for yourself. Tell us about that and what you found from the people in your community, in your age range, about how the pandemic has impacted not only those around you, but also how you think about life and what's ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it has been a devastating experience for many to realize that to get really be homebound for 18 months. And in my retirement community, we were in our apartments for 12 weeks, so I think we all have had to learn to live with tremendous uncertainty and change that we just never imagined, that you could close down schools and close down the world. I mean, so we've all had to adapt and adapt and adapt. I think it's been easier, actually, as I said, for those of us in our 70s and 80s, because many weren't working. So I think it's been hardest on the kids that missed out on school and were at home in those critical years. And also for some of my clients were working moms and had 3 kids that they had to keep going to their Zoom classes, and they would flag and not be interested. And the moms had their jobs and these kids that were not so happy. And it was I think women have been set back, some people say 50 years by the pandemic. So that is a hard thing, and I think it's hard. People need encouragement and some people, once they've given up all these things and stayed home, are finding it hard to get out and about. And of course, now we're learning that the pandemic's going to be with us in some form, maybe. So it does take courage, I think, to get out. But I think the rewards are I found, as I wrote, that the rewards are just immeasurable. And I keep saying to myself, and I believe this in my bones, that much more is possible than we know. And so that the real question is, what is possible for me? And I think that each person needs to ask that, and the answers will be different. But much more is possible in our older years than we ever dreamed. And so but it is a question, I think, a little bit of faith. And I think, but there's, again, my science behind it. There's some studies that show if you have a positive attitude about aging, you're going to live 7.5 years longer than people that have a negative. And so it's really all in your attitude. And you do have control to a degree about your attitude, to a large degree.
Katharine, there's 2 things I want to ask you about what you just said, because I love it. When you talk about aging, is there a time period or an age when people generally start to think about aging? Is it in their 60s? Is it in their early 70s? What's that time period where you would recommend that people really start to give the next chapter of their life some serious thought and to reflect and to have that positive attitude and positive mindset?
Well, I think you need it all along. And I think, as I was saying, everybody ages differently. So I think the age of retirement, I've just been reading and thinking about a study of remapping life that is coming out of Stanford called a new map of life. And what they say is we should see life now as early life, childhood, adult life, and then older life. And that what's wrong with our society right now is people as in the middle are working way too hard, that we've got to stretch out work. So that's an interesting concept. But I think that, so now see that, we have to see that at every decade, we probably need to do a reassessment but it happens. I think people should be planning in their 50s, thinking of the next step. And because they've got to figure out, I think people retire too early, but that's because the workplace isn't set up. We need jobs that are part-time and flexible. And then it would match the way we age. Because I was lucky enough to have part-time jobs and flexible jobs. And then you can work till you're 87. But if you have a job where you're on a line or something, you're never going to do it. So I think hopefully people will get the idea and get some idea of different ways to plan and think about. So when you're 50, you start the conversation. When you're 60, you take another look. And then all along, and I think even on a yearly basis of planning, and I think it makes sense to set some goals, and even if the goal is to do less. That's where I am. I was
going to ask you, tell us about your personal goals for 2022 as we enter the holiday season, as we turn the page on 2021, look forward, fingers crossed, to an even better 2022. I agree with you. I think the pandemic's going to be with us much longer into the new year. But what specific goals do you have for yourself as we head into the new year?
So you're going to laugh at this because I actually just retired from the psychotherapy practice.
Well, congratulations.
And that was because I had been ill in the summer, but I really did need slow down. I am not a person, I am a doer. I'm someone that is always packing too much into the day. I'm a stoic. I ignore all the health problems. So slowing down was a goal. And what I found, in the 3 weeks that I've been retired, I realized, well, I'm not at all retired because I'm working hard on these blogs. I'm giving talks like this one. I have a whole different career, a plan B, and this is really a plan C career around being a writer. And so my goals for the year are to continue my blogs, which I just write them once a month, but also to continue doing these kinds of talks. I've got things lined up, some talks lined up for the new year. And people are kidding me and saying, well, you're going to write about the 90s? And they are all telling me examples of people. And they say, you should interview Joe over here. He's 94. And I do. And there are stories all the time of people in their 90s doing marathons. And then there was some guy jumping out, doing skydiving. He on his 80th birthday, he wanted to jump out of the sky 80 times in one day. I mean, there's crazy stuff. People can do a lot.
Does that mean we're going to see you do that?
That's not in my goals. I'm not going to be jumping out doing skydiving. I'm not getting any tattoos either. So.
Fair enough. But Katharine, you mentioned that you're a doer. Has being active, has being a doer, and whether it's your psychotherapy practice or now this different stage for you, the talks, your great blogs, your writings, your books, do you see that as a way to keep going, keep moving forward, to bring you that happiness in a different way, obviously, than your private practice, but by being active in your mind and physically as well, does that help you not only set goals for yourself, but derive some incredible pleasure and great happiness?
Yeah, I do think, and one of my guidelines for it is, I do think that I'm learning to be, not only to be a doer, but to have more time being. And I now meditate every day. I'm trying to meditate every day. And I'm seeing that there's growth on that side of it. So I think it's getting a balance between the doing and the being. it's also, I think that the key for me, I think there's two keys. One is the idea of having some routines that take care of health. I mean, I do think you have to do some things like that. That's kind of been a goal. And then I think that purpose is underrated, or is so much more important than I had ever realized. So I do think that it's really critical and to find a purpose, something that you enjoy. And there's all kinds of purposes that can be, they may not be, but certainly probably for most people won't be paid work in their late 70s and 80s. And that's the key. And that's what I'm right now writing about and helping people figure out how to find a purpose. So, because I think I always go back to Viktor Frankl, who wrote about Auschwitz, and he found that it wasn't the most healthy people that survived. It was the people that had something to live for and that they wanted to get through. So I do believe it's good for your whole well-being and your longevity and a purpose takes some doing to do. You know, usually people share it. It can't be just if someone's like a singer, they want to sing in a group that performs or whatever.
Katharine, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to someone in their 80s? You talk about your dance class, you talk about your writing. What's the advice that you would give to someone in their 80s to get up, get out there, try something new, try to find that purpose and seek something that gives them such great happiness?
Well, I think it is that life holds much promise up to all the very last days. And so I would hope that people would realize that they can have love and pleasure and just to their very last days, and that this is possible. And almost if they say that, so that if they're not feeling happy and they aren't feeling that day after day, that's not their fate, but that they need to get some help, go to a social worker or a psychologist or psychotherapist, or go to their doctor and get some kind of medication. But I think that all of us deserve the time that we're older to be a happy time, mostly a happy time, and we will have losses, but it should balance out to be a good time of life.
Katharine, you mentioned the good time of life. You have, as I mentioned, really wonderful resources. Your book, 80-somethings. Tell all the listeners and the audience how they can stay in touch with you and find your book.
Yeah, well, the book I think it's on Amazon. I think they ran out for a while, but I think maybe they have some now again. But and it's going to be a paperback coming out in a few months. But I think that they can go to Amazon or other places to get it, and they can stay in touch with me. I have a newsletter, which is www.Katharine Esty, all one word, about capital E and capital K.com. And just for me, the tricky thing is all my name. People keep calling me Etsy instead of Esty, and they spell Katharine wrong. But other than that, if you get the right spelling, which is with two A's, and that it's ESTY, they'll get to me. And I have all sorts of resources for collect kind of articles and things that I find that move me. They put in the newsletter, as well as my blog, which sort of is the evolution of my thinking. And I welcome readers and hearing from them too.
Katharine, this was absolutely fantastic. It was inspirational, powerful, motivational. Your blogs, your newsletters, your books, they're all must read. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Looking forward to a wonderful 2022 ahead. Thank you very much for coming on the Schein podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun. I enjoyed it a lot.
Episode 28 in the books. What an absolutely phenomenal show to end the year. Producer Dave, what an amazing show. What an amazing year. Thank you for absolutely everything.
And thank you, Evan, for my opportunity to be a small part of this endeavor. Season 1 was a tour de force, but if you thought Season 1 was great, you won't believe Season 2. That's a teaser for you, and I look forward to it, Evan.
Great, Dave. And the brilliant Katharine Esty. She was terrific. What an absolutely amazing interview to end the year. Thank you to her, and thank you to all the listeners. You can listen to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, and all major podcast platforms. The Schein on Podcast YouTube channel is coming in 2022, along with a lot more content and new Schein on Podcast segments. Check out the complete archive of podcast episodes from season 1. Follow the podcast and follow me on social media for the latest content. Head over to scheinondivorce.com. Send in your emails, your comments to evan@scheinondivorce.com. Happy holidays. Happy and healthy New Year, everybody. I'm Evan Schein, and we'll talk to you again in the new year. See you in 2022.